For Creamer Media's Policy, I'm Sashni Murli. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me to discuss our various ways of relating to lockdown. Now, your column was written at the time of entry into Level 3 more than a month ago, with some opening up and some of the openings later being closed, as with the ban on alcohol and renewed curfew. How do you think the state should deal with the competing interests of saving lives and enabling those who are alive to survive economically?
When I wrote the column, I disagreed with Professor Glenda Gray saying that there needed to be some sort of compromise on control of liquor, because I said they had a trade-off and they had to ensure that businesses were viable. But I see the position that she has adopted and Charles Parry, which is in the face of a rebanning of alcohol, that it should be regulated. And the way she put it is some sort of balance between lives and livelihood. And also the question that has been raised is whether the reason for high occupancy of trauma units was directly attributable to alcohol alone and possibly to the curfew. So I think that we have to find some way of ensuring that the economy doesn't collapse. It is already collapsing. I mean, when you look around, restaurants that were fairly well established have closed, and a whole lot of other businesses are in trouble. And I think that there has to be some sort of via media, not only with alcohol, but also with cigarettes, because what I'm a little bit worried about is that there is a blurring of the idea of prohibition in general with prohibition now. For example, in some of the papers related to cigarettes, they are hoping that some people will give up completely. Now, that is not the job of the state. People have got a freedom of choice, but I think we have to balance that, obviously, with if they're going to use ventilators. But yesterday, Dr. Zweli Mkhize was saying that they may have reached the peak, not only in the Western Cape, but also in Gauteng and in the Eastern Cape. And KZN is now rising. I don't know. I mean, he would have to be very cautious because people are going to throw it in his face. And he also said there can be a recurral, as happened in some other states. So I think that they have to be more flexible with these things. That is my view. You know, you can regulate it and you can limit the quantities. That would be one of the things, because you get these huge bottles of beer and things like that, which end up making beer just as likely to make people drunk as wine, you know? Or let's say hard liquor, whiskey and so forth.
And you accepted the need for the lockdown on the basis that the healthcare system needed time to prepare for a wave of infections. Do you not think that the governments and scientists may have exaggerated the extent of potential infection? Some 40,000 deaths were anticipated, and there have been less than 90,000. And like you said, Gauteng, Western Cape, and Eastern Cape possibly have reached their peak.
Yes, there seem to be about 9,800 today. And they were correct, I think, to fear for the worst. And I think what they've been very careful to say all along is that the advice that they give may change as they learn more. But some people like Stephen Friedman have said, we defer too much to doctors. And who is to say that we can't push back more with the infection and prevent it from reaching as far as they suggest. So it may have been, we don't know, we've got a long way to go. But I think one of the factors in South Africa is that if a vaccine comes before it reaches into some of the rural areas, it may well be that people can be immunized. So I don't know. I've followed this more than any other medical thing before in my life. However, I think no one really knows, and it's best that we're prepared for the worst. And Dr. Mkhize says that they've got enough beds to deal with what lies ahead. I'm not so sure about KZN, and I'm a bit wary personally of the idea that Eastern Cape has reached its peak. But also, what I thought was good with Dr. Mkhize, he also said that these excess numbers of so-called natural deaths, he took on board that many of them could, in fact, be deaths related to COVID-19. And from now on, every post-mortem, every death certificate must be issued after they've tested the deceased for COVID-19. So I think we're going to get more accurate figures.
And although you fear that the increased loading of taxis to 100% capacity would mean more people being infected and bringing infection to work and spreading it to patrons at restaurants, you also stress that the direction of infection may be both ways, with patrons and bosses infecting workers. Is that a valid fear given the serious dangers of unventilated and packed taxis?
You see, I think the taxis thing is a very bad decision. On the other hand, we don't have a public transport system in South Africa. We don't have trains that are functioning adequately, and they've been sabotaged in the Western Cape. But what I think is important is when you go to a restaurant, you don't have to wear your mask when you're eating. And you can't, and I'm sure people will not be expected to put it on and off between courses. And what the scientists say is that when someone speaks or sings or does something like that, droplets go into the air. So that if the waiter or waitress is wearing a mask and the patrons are not, it can be spread in that direction. But also, my sense is that employers, I went into some place to get a takeaway yesterday, and I was very unhappy to see that the man who was the owner was not wearing his mask properly. And I think the idea is being implemented on a hierarchical basis, so that there's a lot of people who are not the taxi passengers who could be spreading it. So I think what I was cautious about, I fear that we may be stigmatizing people. You know, this thing that we must have air flowing, and you don't have the air flowing when you're sitting alone in the room, but when someone else comes into the room, then you want to have the air go in both directions and things like this. So I think we've got to recognize that all of us are potentially a danger to everyone else.
That was Professor Raymond Suttner unpacking his latest column with Creamer Media's Polity.